We are grateful that Dr. Brawley has traveled from his home in Nashville, correct?
Durham, North Carolina.
Durham, to be with us this evening. I should have known, I'm a Carolina person. We are delighted that Dr. Hans DeWitt has accepted our invitation to deliver this year's lecture entitled, I Want to Learn, I Want to Talk, I Want to Share, Biblical Scholarship Traveling to the Heart of the Andes, an exercise in intercultural indigenous hermeneutics. We are grateful to our colleague and friend, Dr. Daniel Scapani, for sharing Professor DeWitt with us. After a conversation tomorrow with McCormick's El Centro, they head to the Anabaptist Seminary in Indiana for more lectures and conversation. We also want to extend a special welcome to his spouse, Nancy. Hans DeWitt is Professor Emeritus with the Faculty of Religion and Theology at the Free University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. There he has taught and lectured on contextual biblical hermeneutics, contextual and third world theologies, and intercultural hermeneutics. After finishing his master's degree with specialization in Old Testament studies, Professor DeWitt was sent as a missionary to Chile by his church, the Protestant Church in the Netherlands. In Chile, Professor DeWitt was professor of Old Testament and biblical hermeneutics, and there he published numerous articles and several biblical commentaries. After his return to the Netherlands in 1989, he was appointed professor of the Faculty of Theology at the Free University in 1991. In that same year, he completed his doctoral work, a study of the significance of popular readings of the Bible in Latin America. In his productive career, Professor DeWitt has published a long list of monographs and essays on exegesis and hermeneutics, contextual intercultural hermeneutics, methodology, and biblical reading with common readers. His latest project, together with colleagues, is intercultural indigenous Bible reading in the Latin American context, where more than 20 indigenous communities from Chile to Mexico participated in a communitarian and intercultural Bible reading project. Professor DeWitt's scholarship has been translated into more than 10 languages. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Please welcome Hans DeWitt.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. You already mentioned the title of this lecture. I want to learn, I want to talk, I want to share, which is a quote from a Maya participant in one of the projects just described. My first foreign language is not English, but Spanish. And that is because of the fact I've been working for a long time in Chile, and there I started to understand the weight and the importance of context for Bible reading processes. At my free university, I was educated and I was taught about the rights of the text. And in Latin America, I started to understand the importance of the context for the interpretation process of the text. And then back in the Netherlands, I started to understand the weight and the importance of the other context. So therefore, we started in, well, the end of the 90s, a project of intercultural Bible reading. And since then, we have been producing a lot and have been enjoying a lot. But my first foreign language is not English, but is Spanish. Here, my dear wife is sitting. She's from Colombia. We are living together for a long time. But that means that in my house, our common language is Spanish. And to make it worse, I have 3 children who were born in Chile, and they also speak Spanish. So for the language of my dear spouse, this is not a good development, though we try to well, not to force her, but to teach her. that this language of ours is also a beautiful language. I mean Dutch. It is a great privilege and honor for a reformed, urban, ecumenical biblical scholar interested in cross or intercultural hermeneutics to be invited to deliver the Brawley lecture at McCormick Seminary, a seminary that labels itself as cross-cultural, urban, reformed, and ecumenical. There is almost no New Testament text about which Dr. Brawley has not written. And there is almost no exegetical method that has not had his attention. When I discovered that one of the many fields of expertise and scholarly work of Dr. Brawley has been look acts, I was tempted to reflect for this lecture on some of the results of an impressive project of intercultural Bible reading of the passage of Luke 18. That is the story of the widow who goes to the judge, who does not want to do her justice. Some years ago, we invited 18 small groups from 4 Latin American countries, all living in situations of permanent conflict and impunity, to read this passage and then exchange their readings with another partner group. Our main question was to what extent this new method of shared reading of the Bible could become a catalyst for processing the traumas present in the lives of many of these participants. There's no time to go into details, though we discovered a lot. It was a beautiful process. And we published the book first in Spanish, and then now a bigger book is published in English about this way of reading in contexts of impunity. Perhaps the most important discovery, always part of empirical hermeneutics, was the presence of multiplicity. Or infinity, if you prefer that term. An empirical fact that forbids the reduction of the text's transcendence and is the space in which the fullness of revelation can be manifested. This was a divine experience, commented a participant from El Salvador. I can't find words to express what this has meant in my life. The reason I'm mentioning this result of the project about on Luke 18, and we'll be taking you on a trip to indigenous communities in Latin America, in the Andes, in a moment, is to make clear how much this kind of Bible reading, where hospitality, and I say that with emphasis, where hospitality and dependence are crucial elements, differs from fundamentalist modes of Bible reading. We all know that a connection between reading and power, between fundamentalist ways of Bible reading and war, is very important and is very intimate. Man never commits evil so passionately and wholeheartedly as when he does so out of religious conviction. Umberto Eco once said, in these days, we see a new and horrible connection, and we should not be naive, even though several Orthodox bishops and theologians rejected and repudiated the Russian invasion in Ukraine. The support of many of the hierarchy of the Moscow Patriarchate for President Vladimir Putin's war against Ukraine is rooted in a form of orthodox, ethno-religious fundamentalism, totalitarian in character, called the Russian world, a false teaching which is attracting many in the Orthodox Church and has even been taken up by the far right and Catholic and Protestant fundamentalists. Again, this Russian world, so the teaching goes, the true defenders of Orthodox teaching with a traditional morality and inflexible understanding of the biblical text and tradition stands the corrupt West, led by the United States and Western European nations, which have capitulated to liberalism, globalization, and homosexual rights promoted in gay parades. Perhaps you saw recently Patriarch Kirill, head of the Orthodox Russian Church, blaming the Ukraine for having provoked the war because of its Western sympathies and its desire, mark my words, and its desire to celebrate in the Ukraine events like the Gay Pride. The main question of this lecture, relevant I think also for Europe, so deeply divided nation, is: can biblical texts also be places for peace negotiation? Therefore, I want to travel with you to the Andes and reflect on the results of an intercultural Bible reading project located within the field of empirical hermeneutics. It deals with interpretation processes between marginalized indigenous communities in Latin and Central America. It may come as a surprise to you that this European urban ecumenical theologian started a project in Latin America amongst indigenous groups, and therefore I will start by relating the personal experience that led me to initiate with others the project and the discussion. And then in a second step, I'll review very briefly what happened with the Bible coming to Latin America. In a third step, I will reflect on the traumatic relationship between the Bible and indigenous readers. Empirical hermeneutics, I will emphasize in the next step, is a fundamental post-colonial approach to the analysis and practice of interpretation processes of the Bible. And I will finish summarizing some of the results of the project. If this is lasting too long, you just raise your hand or you stand up and start walking, not leaving the room at least. Or we can ask our dear friend Daniel Schivani to do one of his beautiful dances. He is a wonderful dancer. So you understand what? My personal voice. How did I come to initiate with others this indigenous intercultural Bible reading project? It went as follows. The atmosphere is serene. With great dedication and devotion, the participants read the story of Tamar and Amnon, 7 Samuel. A few sessions later, they read the story of the prodigal son in Luke 15. There are 7 participants in my small group, all Mexican. The total number of participants is about 60, men and women of different church denominations and life experiences. They have now gathered in Mexico City for a course on contextual reading of the Bible. And the central question of the course is, what do you see when you use trauma and trauma processing as keys to reading the Bible. In front of me, in the circle of my small group, is a young indigenous woman, a mother. She comes from a small peasant village in the interior of Chiapas. She is a Maya. Her 2-year-old son is on the ground having fun in the middle of a small circle of participants. After a few sessions, her shyness dissipates, and the mother tells in a soft voice how everyone in her Mayan village is busy with drug trafficking. Everybody is planting poppies, which are used for opium cultivation, as you know. She says that she and her husband are the only ones who plant corn, which means threat and exclusion for them. The villagers wonder how they can earn their money if they are not in the poppy cultivation. When asked which Bible text she would choose to share with her villagers to connect the Bible to the problems they are both experiencing, she says she would like to read the parable of the sower. During this course on contextual reading of the Bible, there was a considerable number of indigenous people from all over Mexico. And what they discovered was how fertile and enriching it is to listen to each other and to dethrone yourself in the process of sharing and listening to the other. To share experiences with people from previous unknown places of struggle. Thus, at the end of the course, the indigenous participants themselves asked us, the facilitators, to look into the possibility of starting a project of communitarian intercultural Bible reading amongst indigenous communities in Latin and Central America. This request brought about a mix of feelings. Hesitation was accompanied by embarrassment. Is a European biblical scholar, despite many years of experience with Bible reading in Latin America, able to participate in such a project with integrity and without prejudice? What finally made me and others decide to accept the invitation was an element of the ethics of invitation. By this I mean the following: if somewhere in the history of Christianity and Christian theology, colonialism and empire have been present, it is in the history of the Bible, in the so-called discovery of the Americas. Dutch scholar Mieke Bal once expressed herself about the Bible in strong words. The Bible, she wrote, of all books, is the most dangerous one. The one that has been endowed with the power to kill. And that is what we see in the history of the discovery of America, that this statement has proven the truth. The discovery has proven the truth of this statement. Chilean biblical scholar who died 2 years ago, one of the most famous biblical scholars in the time of the 80s and 90s. He published a lot about the poor, reading the Bible, and the Bible as memory of the poor, etc. Representing many voices, writes about this history of colonialism. The Bible was read and interpreted in a colonial and Western hermeneutics of domination. Even today, the Indians of Latin America, or Abijana, are experiencing a trauma with the Bible. We have to return to that expression, a trauma. Indians reading the Bible or not reading the Bible, they have a trauma with the Bible. Considering this invitation, the invitation considering this, the invitation became a question we decided to respond. And the main question of this intercultural indigenous Bible reading project was, can the Bible for Latin American indigenous readers become a book of healing? Can it also accompany strategies of resistance through communal Bible reading, connecting previously unknown places of struggle and exclusion? Let me very briefly dedicate some words to the history, the long history and terrible history of the Bible in the history of the conquest. There are three perspectives. What I wrote is much more elaborate than what I'm summarizing now. The first perspective on Bible and Conquista is that of what is called the pink legend. The pink legend. And the pink legend entails that the Indians converted in a voluntary way to Christianity without any resistance, leaving behind their religiosity, their system of belief, the Incas and the Mayas, etc. There is the pink legend. There is a black legend. That all what the Indians believed was eradicated, was erased, and that the only result of the encounter between Indians and Spaniards and conquistadors was a massacre. Our dear friend, the Puerto Rican historian and theologian, Luis Rivera Pagan, criticizes the use of the term black legend. He said it is difficult to sustain the perverse thesis that the stories of their humiliations are nothing more than a black legend created by the fantasy and imagination of Bartolomé de las Casas. Are the Indians human? Are they human beings? No, said one of the most foremost philosophers of that time in a terrible debate, a long debate with Bartolomé de las Casas. May the Indians be enslaved? Yes, because they eat as many snakes and lizards and spiders and worms as are found on the ground. Their bestiality is greater than that of any beast in the world. The men of the mainland eat human flesh and are more sodomist than any generation. That was the image of the Indians presented to the court in Sevilla in 15 whatever. In the first decades of the conquest, the Bible is the big unread book. The Bible is not at stake, and you will not find. It is hard to find in those first years of the conquest rereadings of indigenous priests of biblical texts. That is hard. That there have been a lot of readings, but they are not put down on paper. What the Indians had to, in order to not to go to hell, the indigenous people needed to convert and know the catechism, the creed, the Our Father, and the Ave Maria, not the Bible. There is a third perspective, that the two previous ones, the pink legend and the black legend, highly underestimate the creativity of the Indians and the indigenous people themselves. There is a bold statement of an anthropologist, Jennifer Scheper-Hughes, and she comes to the following daring statement: Christianity proliferated because surviving indigenous community decided that it would and should survive. Indigenous communities throughout New Spain came to regard the new religion as their own. Well, there's no time to explore more, but that is what she says. Then, trauma, silence, and resistance. When Pablo Richard describes or defines the relationship between the Indians, the indigenous people, the original inhabitants of the continent, and the Bible as traumatic. Well, what we saw in our empirical data was great enthusiasm. The more than 20 groups who were invited to participate from Chile, it was said already, to Mexico. And they were Mapuches, they were Mayas, they were Quechuas, they were, they started to participate with great enthusiasm, very deeply motivated to take part in this endeavor of sharing the biblical text. So it was hard for us to recognize what Pablo Richard said about the relationship between Bible and indigenous as traumatic. But then we had a closer look to our empirical data. And then we saw silence as a mark of trauma. The essence of trauma is silence. And we saw also a deep longing for new ways of Bible reading, which we understood as ways of trauma processing. So on the one hand, there was silence. And on the other hand, what we saw happening in the groups was that they said, well, give us a new way of reading the Bible. Let me give you two quotes. The silence quote, so to speak. From an indigenous community, we visited that community high in the mountains in Colombia and the southern part of Colombia. A woman of that group says, well, this, meaning by that, the communal reading of the text, is a new methodology, she says. It was the first time, and please pay attention to what she said, it was the first time that a study of the Bible was made considering what participants said. That means that previously there was Bible reading, but there was authority. There was the priest who came. There was the pastor who came. There was the exegete, and they never listened to the people. So that was the silence. The people were silenced and were not seen as competent readers of the biblical text. That is the silence quote. Then the longing for a new way of Bible reading from a group from Guatemala. A person makes a very lucid and eloquent statement. He says, we will do our reading in an indigenous way. Because if we do it like other churches do, then I prefer not to do it. I want to learn. I want to talk. I want to share. And that is the title of this. And when he says, I want to learn, okay. But I want to talk. That is breaking the silence. That is a trauma. No? What we learned is that what groups were asking was a new Bible, the real Bible. Give us the real Bible, and not the Bible of a priest or the pastor of the church or the church. It is a call for a third place. A third place, not the place where Western ways of reading enslave the text, nor the place where, as a result of indigenous fundamentalism, the biblical text is totally rejected. What they want is a third place where new questions can be put to the text, and where neither the biblical text nor the ancestral tradition become victims of fundamentalism. Let me give you a very short description of the flesh and blood readers who participated in this project. More than 20 small groups of indigenous readers from Chile, etc., guided by indigenous facilitators, read the same biblical text, made a report of their experience, and started to exchange their experiences with other indigenous communities. So we connected the Bolivian. There were 3 or 4 Bolivian groups. We connected them with Mexico, with Guatemala, with Peru, with Chile. On the images that all groups sent along, we see grooved faces. Nowhere obese. Many still in their traditional costumes. Atuendo, we say in Spanish. The woman always reading quietly, modestly. The little round heads in Peru and Bolivia. The barrels in Colombia. These are the little beloved ones of God. What all participants share is pride of being indigenous. Participants come together in churches or in chapels, capillas, in the patio of a house, in a living room. Most do not speak Spanish. In most cases, the dialogue about the biblical text was in their own language. The church's participants belong to a rich spectrum. Presbyterians participated, and Methodists, and Roman Catholics, and Pentecostals, and people who were very much devoted to, for instance, a Maya spirituality. As different as the contexts are in which participants live, as diverse are their worries and dreams. And those are poverty. Poverty is a recurrent theme. The group from San Cristobal de las Casas, you know where it is, San Cristobal de las Casas in Mexico, right? Here, everything is expensive except death. Another theme is the land of the ancestors, stolen by foreign mining companies. And then there are the little worries of their own little lives, the health of my wife, my roof is leaking, I have no work, the upbringing of my children, my son lives far away, my husband is an alcoholic. Two words about the indigenous perspectives and the biblical text, and then I will go over to describe, to give you some of the results of the project. Our choice for empirical hermeneutics, and by empirical hermeneutics, if we understand by hermeneutics the theoretical practice of reflecting about what is happening when somebody reads a text. That is for me hermeneutics. when we talk about empirical hermeneutics, what we do is take into account the reading experiences by ordinary readers. So we are not talking about exegesis. Exegesis is a critical way of reading. And I see exegesis as complementary. We are talking about spontaneous readings and spontaneous ordinary readers. Well, in order to discover the indigenous perspective, not Western, no, but the indigenous perspective, we had to do at least 2 or 3 things. The first was to pay attention to what is dear to the world of the indigenous. Dreams, narrative, stones that speak, and rivers that live, and memory. No, a lot of what we can call visceral memories brought this project about. Like look, when all those groups, all those people in situations of conflict started to read the parable of this widow who goes to the judge, that text is able, like almost all biblical texts, was able to evoke visceral memories. And there is a woman who said, well, we are living in a situation where the corpses of our sons are scattered over the hills we see here from the window. Well, that same element we saw also in the reading of the text, and I will talk about the text briefly, why did we choose the text we chose. So what we had to do was to learn to pay attention to what is dear to the indigenous soul and context and worldview. That was in the second place. What we had to do was to learn not to reduce our scheme of evaluating all those pages of spontaneous reading of the text to Western criteria. So we started to, instead of the metaphor of mastery and to comprehend and to exhaust, etc. No, you know, Derrida has written about a lot about the intimate connection between reading and power. And he talked us a long time ago already that a lot of modes of expression, when we talk about reading, especially when we talk about reading biblical text, have to do or has to do with power. Yes? Well, we started to learn to use other metaphors and verbs in order to not reduce our evaluation of those reading processes to Western criteria. So we started to talk about reading as play and exegesis as methodological Ludism and freedom and imagination, etc. Then finally we also said, well, okay, we need exegesis. We need exegesis. But we should include a very important criterion. To what extent this way of reading the Bible is life-giving or life-sapping? Yeah, that was one of our ultimate criteria. Is this way of reading the text excluding people, killing people, or is this life-giving? Is this broadening horizons? the text we choose was Genesis 2. And that was recommended by indigenous facilitators. And they said, well, this is foundational story. And perhaps will this text give indigenous participants the opportunity to explore their own ancestral foundational stories in a new manner. And that happened. The story is about the intimate relationship between the creator, the earth, the animals, and humankind. The relation male-female gets attention. Themes like water, rivers, fertility, man, animals, man, earth, the Pachamama, the Mother Earth, seem to offer many possibilities for appropriation. Well, I will take now my last step. If there's time. What have been the results of this project? I will go in 3 moments. And my question is, has there been transformation? Transformation of the reader, transformation of the text, the status of the text, the content of the text, and transformation of the perception of the other reader. Transformation of the reader. We could fill the rest of the evening dwelling on that theme or question. The communal reading of the Bible text had a therapeutic effect on many participants. There was room for participants to unburden themselves. In Spanish, you say, desahogar, leave your house, and get to the more exotic, to the most intimate. To hear each other's sometimes very intimate stories. My husband is an alcoholic. Reading the Bible became a celebration. And when I compare, you understand that I have participated a lot in these processes. And when I compare the way in which in the Netherlands, we come together, read the Bible, and leave with those celebrations, there is a world of difference. A world of difference. In the Netherlands, if the clock is set for 8 o'clock in the evening, we sit there at 8 o'clock, before 8 o'clock. What we bring is our Bible and our agendas. And at 10 o'clock, whether or not, there is a lot of discussion. And there are the most beautiful remarks. At 10 o'clock, we finish. And in Cuba, people went to the mountains a weekend, a whole weekend. And I have here a quote of a Mexican group builds an altar before the session begins with the fruits of the earth, and they pray, "Dear Mother, take care of us well, and may it never occur to us to sell." So reading the Bible became a celebration. Numerous are the references to ancestral traditions. So unlike or instead of what, for instance, several Pentecostal churches think, that you should say goodbye, farewell to your ancestral tradition. What our experience has been is that the reading of the Bible text about the land, about creation, about man, woman, etc., signified a rebirth. They became more indigenous, so to speak. So reading the Bible is not an obstacle for recovering my own roots and ancestral tradition. It is on the contrary. There was a renaissance. We saw a new empowerment that people started to discover the strength and the value of their own traditions. tradition was not only a carrier of visual memories, but also a source of self-criticism. When they read the story of the creation of Eve from the rib or the side, well, that takes them to machismo in the communities. And there is a Colombian woman who says, if we look at our community, there is a lot of inequality, mistreatment, abandonment, injustice, loss of our culture. So with the readers, a lot happens. What happens with the text? Let me summarize. Let's say from an exegetical point of view, it is very interesting to see what people did with the biblical text. We can say that there was a before and an after. For many, the text was unknown, and many did not have a translation of that text in their own language. So there had to be a Spanish translation was translated in Aymara, I'd say. So summarizing, what I can say is that the text before the reading was like a remote aunt or uncle or a part of the family whom you never met. And after, it became a journey companion, somebody who started to walk with you and to inspire you and to orient you. So at the end of the process, the status of the text has changed radically. From an unknown narrative, the text has become a traveling companion. It's too much to list even part of the findings of participants. But if we were to capture in one word what has proved so specific to the indigenous reading, then we will show the holistic, ecological, ethical perspective. So they understood the text as a message for their lives. Men and earth belong together, belong to each other, the holistic part. The ecological dimension, many groups started to discover God as the campesino, as the farmer who prepared the garden with a lot of time, and they liked that very much, that thought that God had prepared long before the creation of man, the garden, the place to stay. That was the ecological. And the ethical is to guard the earth. We have two conditions, says the Chilean group. We are part of nature, and we are at the same time responsible for guarding and protecting. Then, a last point, the transformation through the encounter of the other reader, or with the other reader. For many groups, this was the first encounter through writing with a group not belong to their context. And several groups considered this process of exchange and contact over the frontier as a real trip abroad. They felt themselves tourists, and a lot of groups finished their project saying, we want to visit you. We want to see you, to know you better. and we want to prolong this project. So, at the hermeneutical, theological level, what happened was that the other reader started to get a new status, started to become, in the eyes of the other group, a competent reader of scripture. And the other reader, indigenous reader, from another place of struggle, started to become not an enemy. And Bible reading was not entering the battlefield like it is for many. The other reader started to become an epiphanic space, a space of revelation. Let me finish with these words. I've tried to present some results of the process of Bible reading in which not power or ownership, but welcoming the other, multiplicity and infinity were the hermeneutical pillars. This, of course, and I would say that that is a big message for this deeply divided country. This, of course, implies vulnerability and a fragile hermeneutical identity. So this process of sharing, of willing to give a place to the other, and to consider the other as competent as a reader as you yourself consider. So a fragile hermeneutic identity is a condition sine qua non for the success of this project, of this way of life. And then I finished with a reference to a very important biblical text. Is not one of the most impressive biblical stories touching the heart of Israel's conversion to the other, that of Jacob at Peniel, after the encounter with the other, who always was the enemy. He goes limping. He never again can be a hunter, Jacob. He always wanted to be as his brother, the expert hunter, Esau. He goes limping, so he will never be able to become a hunter. After the encounter with the other, he goes limping. He can never again be a hunter, but he comes out blessed. And another name, and another identity. The other, not as enemy, but as epiphanic space. I will not leave you unless you bless me with your interpretation. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much for that stimulating talk, and we have 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. So we would love to have questions, and I just want to remind everyone that we also have people watching live stream who can also participate. And so if you are watching, feel free to put in the chat your question, and we can include that in the conversation. But of course, for you all in the room too, please go ahead and raise your hand, and I will give you the mic so that those who are online can hear as well. Don't be shy.
We have a question in the Zoom chat, actually, from William Reyes. He said, how would you theologically and practically defend Ukraine against Putin's invasion, war, and genocide against Ukraine with self-defense, material weapons beyond prayer as a justice matter towards peace for the world beyond?
Can you say it one more time?
Yeah.
Summarize it. Was a long question.
Yes. Basically, with everything going on with Ukraine, how would you theologically and practically defend it? How would you defend it with them using material weapons beyond prayer as justice? Like, instead of, like, how can you theologically defend that, basically, with them using those that matter? Does that make sense?
Wait,
No, go ahead.
sounds to me that question is, they could use prayer as
Yeah.
a defense, but they're using military weapons. So what sort of theological and biblical justification do you give in support of Ukraine if they have left behind prayer as a sort of essential defense mechanism?
I'll let you go.
Okay, yeah. I'm not so sure they left behind prayer and ritual, because at our television, on the news thing, we see prayer. We see even blessings of soldiers. I'm not sure I like that, of course. We see funerals, and we see priests participating and encouraging the people. So what I do not understand, there is no justification or any legitimate argument to justify this war. This is an innocent people. So this is invasion. This is war. This is terrorism. And when Biden was asked about Putin, if he's a war criminal, he said yes, and then again, and he's right. This is a crime of war. And when you ask me to reflect theologically about the resistance of the Ukrainians, if that is a question, I understand it fully. I'm not in favor of war whatsoever. My dear wife is a Mennonite, and to talk about war and violence in the Mennonite church is difficult. They are changing a little bit, but there's another Mennonite, and we have been talking about it. But if you are attacked, my theological defense or thought about resistance in the Ukraine is that life is precious and should be defended. If you're attacked, then don't give up, and don't let there be a too easy situation of murder and massacre. I'm not sure I understand the question well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I'm wondering about this method, the empirical method as you outline it, in use among first world readers, and as a method that can allow the scripture its foreign status, its novel status, its authoritative status perhaps, but also yielding provocation and evocation for readers also in the first world who've been beneficiaries of power.
Okay, I think this is a very important question, beautiful question. On Thursday last week and Friday, I had to work with 35 chaplains of the Dutch army. And what we did was contextual reading of the Bible. And one of the things was precisely in that direction. How can you use, well, that's a bad word, but how can you use the biblical story for healing? And how do you deal with the paradox that you're dealing with soldiers who were trained to kill? And then you're going to talk about vulnerability. No, those who kill and those who are wounded. How do we take that paradox? Is it possible to exert some criticism within the defense and the army? So what we try to do, not only in this situation of chaplains of the Dutch army, but in general, church, because let's say we have been talking about small indigenous groups. And from the beginning, 20 years ago, we said small groups are elementary because there you can pour your heart out and tell who you are. And there's intimacy. And there's the public transcript. And you don't talk about your feelings so easily, but in the hidden situation. There, so the groups should be small. And that is what we try to do with churches and to get us in the Western world out of the dominant reading traditions, which are castrated and are worse for people. What I mean is that all of us are captives of how the church is reading the Bible. And this way of reading with small groups is a sort of dissident way that tries to honor the capacity of biblical texts to evoke those dissident experiences. Is it an answer to your? He will start talking about war.
No, in connection with the previous question, of course, the Bible can be, because this is about Bible, English Bible, there is a lot of lament, protest, demanding from God, etc. For example, in the Psalms, and which incidentally, especially in the imperfect Psalms, God is the one who is going to destroy the enemy. Right? So the one way to connect in the question with the lecture is here, communities can still read the Bible with anger, with tears, etc., and lamenting and processing the trauma. And some will not be even able to do that because the trauma can be so devastating and so. But then there's a solidarity. Here we have a sense of the larger church, and we pray one for one. So there is a whole area in which this actually applies in terms of the use of Bible and praying with the Bible, right? And learning from other communities, and including those in biblical times, shall we say, that demanding justice from God. And what are you waiting to destroy this Putin, evil man, whatever? So I just wanted to add that little thought.
No, of course, even in the Psalms, you know that our father Calvin, our father, yours is Menno Simons, our father Calvin, he wrote a beautiful commentary on the Psalms, and he says, well, the metaphor I use for this book is anatomy of all parts of the soul. So for him, the Psalms were trauma, and there is lament, and there is loss, and there may be even place for revenge. You remember the text which Saul is that ends with the prayer that the children of the enemy smashed to the
Yeah, God will do that, not the psalmist. God will do that, right?
no, it's
You
no,
Take
it's-
your children, the cats that will get some stuff.
yeah.
Not the psalmist, but I'm not God, but may your enemies take the children and dash them.
Yes.
One for Lisa.
So we have time for one more question. Dr. Brawley?
I don't have a question. I'm blown away by your presentation. And I guess I want to give some testimony. When I went to Mexico, I went with a patronizing attitude. What can I do to help these people? I was there for only 3 years. But what I discovered, I taught in a seminary, but I did have contact with the Huasteca Potosina in Mexico. One of the things I discovered was not what I could do for them, but what they were contributing to me.
That is what happened here also. I learned more from this project than the other way around, I think. Okay, thank you for the.
Thank you so much. Let's give Professor DeWitt one more round of applause. And thank you again to everyone who is joining us through live stream. For those of you who are in the room, we have a reception outside where we can continue the conversation, and have a good evening.